How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Tes, Daf 99. Unbelievable. We're like on the doorstep of 100, which is amazing. As I've said in the past, it always feels to me like 100 is a milestone, even though on a Masechta like Chullin, we still have, another, a long way to go till the end of the Masechta, but 100 always feels like a milestone, with the only exception being, of course, Masechta Zvachim, where I was in such shock throughout the entire Masechta. I don't think I realized it was over until I was in Menachos. But other than Masechta Zvachim, 100 always feels like a big milestone. So it's exciting that today we are studying Daf 99 of Masechta Chullin. What's going on? There's like something that's like getting my eye. I think what is that? Oh, I don't know. Anyways, I have my beanie is back, at least for today, even though it's the middle of August, not even the middle of August, but I've been noticing some, my camera's been having some issues with autofocus, and my hypothesis, I've been trying a few things. My hypothesis is that maybe my hair was getting in my eyes and the autofocus was struggling to find my eyes. So we'll see if by creating more space around my eyes, that helps. Also, Reb Neil, thank you for sharing that video from the Sheva Brachos the other night at Madison Square Garden for our dear Chaver, Reb Jonathan Shapiro. That was amazing to see. Thanks for sharing it. Mazel tov once again. And I think maybe that was all I wanted to say. We are on day 3 of Ta'arovos. We are going to continue with the discussion we saw was it even at the end? I don't even remember where it was anymore. Was it at the end? No, I don't think it was so much the end. But we saw yesterday that there is a machlokas. We always talk about Shishim. There's another shita of meah that Isser is bottled beheter in 100 parts to 1. So we are going to move further and continue to explore that machlokas. That is going to be the primary focus of really the bulk of today's daf. It's going to be a little bit of a subtle, and I don't know if tricky is quite the word, but it's going to be one step at a time. So we are going to wrap up that discussion. We then will discuss whether sinews impart flavor, yesh begidin benosein tam or not. And with that, we will wrap up Daf 99 of Masechta Chullin. So friends, I'm very excited to study together Daf 99 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, we begin on Daf Tzadi Tes Amid Aleph. I'd say just shy of halfway down the Daf on the Amud on Daf Tzadi Tes Amid Aleph. Yosef Rav Dimi, V'ka'amar Lala Shmaita. Rav Dimi was sitting, and of course he was learning, and he was discussing with Abaye this machlekes, this discussion about Shishim versus meah. As we saw yesterday, that one opinion was Kol Shiurim, Kol Isurin Shabbatorah Shishim. The other opinion was that it is b'meah, it is 100. So as Rav Dimi v'kamila l'ashmaito omarlei Abaye, and Abaye says to Rav Dimi v'chol Isurin Shabbatorah b'meah. What are you talking about? What's meah? What's 100? Shishim. What's meah? Here we go, friends. There, we're going to be learning now 2 Mishnayos from Masechta Orla. Perek Beis of Masechta Orla, Mishnayos Vav and Zayin. They are all about min b'mino and min b'she'eno mino. There's a lot of details for us to work through. A part of what we have to work through also is just the fact that really the Gemara is going to be first working through the second Mishnah before working through the first Mishnah, which makes things a little bit, I'm saying it now to prepare us, that the Gemara is first going to essentially be talking about the Seifa, and is only then going to be talking about the Reisha. So like in the Reisha of the Gemara, we're talking about the Seifa of the Mishnah, and the Seifa of the Gemara, we're talking about the Reisha of the Mishnah. So obviously we'll try to make things as organized as possible, but I just wanted to have us have that in mind already. So basically we're learning two Mishnayos. I'll refer to it as the first Mishnah and the second Mishnah. The first Mishnah talks about min bimino. The second Mishnah talks about min b'she'eno mino. And this is all in the context of Truma, where the ratio when it comes to Truma for Chulin to be mevatel Truma is 100 to 1. To confuse things, not really confuse things, but to add complexity, like positive complexity, like complexity in fine wine, that kind of complexity. To add fine wine complexity, there's a question of if 100 to 1 means 100 to 1 or 101 to 1. Anyways, I'm just kind of setting the stage a little bit for us to now, kind of whetting our appetites, if you will. Here we go. Let me hop a shlick of coffee to kind of get in the mood. Okay. V'atnan. We learn in a Mishnah. Right? This is Abaye questioning the notion that there is such a concept of kol isurin shabatorah b'meah. Maze meah. V'atnan. After all we learn in Mishnayos in Masechta Orla. Lama amru kol hamecham. I'm sorry. Lima amru. In what context did they say kol mechametz v'ametabel, that mechametz is to ferment, that anything that ferments v'ametabel and provides seasoning. Seasoning, of course, spices are far more potent than most other foods that fall into mixtures. Umidameya, Rashi says midameya means basically a cook. I'll read it from Rashi. Midameya umevashel chulin v'truma yochad. When you cook truma and chulin together. Lehachmir, so when we're machmir, this is important, min bimino. So when it comes to min bimino, and we're going to explain this, and we'll work through it together, lat. So when we're talking about being stringent, that's min bimino. Lahakol ula achmir, when we're talking about being lenient and stringent, min b'she'eno mino. Okay, so stringent is min bimino. Lenient and stringent is min b'she'eno mino. Vikatani seifa. And the seifa, i.e. the second Mishnah, which is talking about min b'she'eno mino. And here we go. So now until the end of the Amud, we're going to be learning about the second Mishnah there, the Mishnah there that discusses, Mishnah in Orla, that discusses min b'she'eno mino. What do we say there? We say the following. Lahakel ulahachmir min b'she'eno mino. When we talk about that there is leniencies and stringencies, we're talking about min b'she'eno mino, ketzad. How so? Thus so. Grisen I think is translated as split beans. I don't know what split beans are. I do know what split peas are, so I'll work with that. What does anybody know what are split beans? I didn't look it up. Obviously I could have, but I don't know. Does anybody know what split beans are? Split peas. You always say about split peas. What are split beans? So I'm going to say split peas with your permission. Grisen shenizbash luma adashin. Split peas that were cooked tzazamen together with lentils. Split peas and lentils. Sounds like it could be delicious. Now the split peas were truma and the lentils were chulin. So the question is, what's with the mixture? Is it meduma? Do we have to treat the whole mixture like truma? Or can we say that the split peas, the truma, is bottle in the mixture? Well, let's see. Im yesh boim b'noisein tam. If you have a kohen do a taste test for you and he tells you b'noisein tam that you can, in fact, taste the split peas, well, in that case, right, we had said that by min b'she'eno mino, we had said, and this is min b'she'eno mino, we had said lahakel ulahachmir. There's a stringent scenario and there's a lenient scenario. Well, guess what? When the split peas can be tasted in the mixture, it is going to be the stringent scenario. You can taste this or you can taste the truma. So ben yesh boin la'alos b'meah ve'echad. So irrespective of if there is a ratio of 101 to 1. We'll get back to that in a second. Bein ein boin la'alos b'meah ve'echad, or whether there is no ratio, aser. The mixture is aser. So basically, if you can taste the iser, which is in this case truma, which is obviously not strictly iser, it's holy, it's kadosh, but it is limited to kohanim, obviously, and it's also for any non-kohanim. Now, so when you can taste the iser, when you can taste the truma, forget about it. If you could taste the split peas, so then it's aser. Regardless of what mathematical equations you want to equate, if you can taste the split peas, it's aser. Whether there are 101 parts, let's talk about that for a second. The Gemara right now is assuming that when it says meah ve'echad, it doesn't mean 100 to 1, it means 101 to 1. Okay? So, whether there are 101 parts of lentils to 1 part split peas, doesn't matter. If you can taste the split peas, it's aser. And certainly if there's less than 101 parts of lentils to split peas. But regardless, it doesn't matter. If you can taste the split peas, it's aser. And that's what the lehachmir case is, right? When we said by min she'eno mino, there's to be lenient and to be stringent, that's stringent. If you could taste the split peas. Ein boem b'nosein tam. Now, if you can't taste the split peas, you give it to the kohen for a taste test, is I only taste lentils. Well, this is where we can be lenient. Bein sheyesh behem lahalos b'meah ve'echad, whether, of course, there are 101 parts of lentils to split peas, but even bein ein ben lahalos b'meah ve'echad, but even if there aren't 101 parts lentils to split peas, there's less than that. Nonetheless, if you can't taste the split peas, if all you taste is the lentils, mutter, the mixture is mutter, and there we are being lenient. So when it comes to min b'she'eno mino, we are either stringent or we are lenient when it comes to such a mixture where everything got mixed together and all the flavors got mixed together. If you can taste the split peas, it's automatically aser. If you cannot taste the split peas, it's automatically mutter. And now, the question is the following, and here is Abayi's challenge. Ein boen dehalos b'meah ve'echad ela b'mai. So the assumption here is that we said that if the kohen is unable to taste the split peas, he only tastes lentils, so we said you don't need 101 parts of lentils. If you can't taste the split peas, you don't need the 101 parts. So what do you need? We're saying, okay, you don't need, if you can't taste the split peas, so you don't need 101 parts. Well, what do you need? The assumption is that it is not that just anything goes. It's not that, well, since you can't taste the lentils, so automatically all good. I'm sorry. Since you can't taste the split peas, automatically all good. No. It means that you don't need 101 parts. But you still would need something. What's that something? Lav b'shishim? Are we not saying, so when you can't taste the split peas, so you don't need meah, you don't need 101. You do, however, need shishim. That is Abayi's argument. So we see that when you don't require, right, so we're saying that because you can't taste the split peas, so the requirement of 101 is not necessary, but still you need the general bittul of Isser Be'eter, of Shishim, and Abaye therefore wants to make his argument that the standard bittul for Isser Be'eter is Shishim. And for the Gemara, lo b'meah, 100. That, as I've been saying, that the 101 that we're talking about is not 100 to 1, it's 101 to 1. And the Gemara wants to argue, to say, no, it can be talking about meah as opposed to Shishim. And what it's saying is that if you can't taste the split peas, So we give you an ever so slight discount on the bittul requirement if you can't taste the split peas. So you don't need 101 to 1 anymore. You need 100 to 1. So you don't need 101, but to be mevatel would require meah, which we would argue is the standard bittul of Isser beheter as opposed to Shishim. Okay, fine. So the Gemara wants to, so Abaye tried to challenge the notion of there being a concept of meah. It's got to be Shishim. The Gemara says, no, I could, even though it seems pretty subtle, very subtle discount on the bittul, but I could still argue that we're saying that when there's no flavor of the split peas, you don't need 101, but you need 100. Let me chop another shluck of coffee and we'll go weiter on this very exciting sugya. Now, frag the Gemara. So now to add more layers of wine complexity to the sugya. So, of course, until now we've been working with the second Mishnah, with the Seifa, the second Mishnah that talks about min b'she'eno mino. And I've been explaining that when we're talking about ratios of 101, we're talking about 101 to 1 as opposed to 100 to 1. Now to add some beautiful complexity, the Gemara says, but in the Reisha, in the first Mishnah, which we're going to learn now, the Mishnah of min b'mino, we're talking about 100 to 1 as opposed to 101 to 1. So by min b'she'eno mino, until now we've been talking about 101 to 1. By min b'mino, we're talking about 100 to 1. So now the Gemara says, v'midereisha b'meah, but the Reisha, Mishnah number 1, which we haven't learned yet, the Mishnah about min b'mino, b'meah, is talking about 100 to 1. Have. Seifa, v'midereisha b'meah, I think it's probably have Seifa b'shishin. So then it must be that the Mishnah that we just learned, the second Mishnah, the Mishnah about min b'she'eno mino, must be talking about Shishin. How come? Because the Katani Reisha, the first Mishnah, min b'mino, which we're about to learn, it says, lehachmir min v'mino. That when we say that we're being stringent, that's by min b'mino. We said by min b'she'eno mino, we're stringent and lenient. Stringent when you can taste the Isser. Lenient when you can't taste the Isser. By min b'mino, we're saying we're stringent. Keitzad, how so? Seor shel chitin shenafol leisas chitin. So interestingly, when it comes to min b'mino, usually you can't really taste min b'mino. Right? You have some, chicken soup that falls into other chicken soup. It's all chicken soup. You can't taste, if one of them was usher, whatever. It's an example it's thought of. It's all one thing. You can't differentiate the taste of one part to the other. It's all together. There is an exception though to min b'mino where you actually can taste the Isser, and that is if we're talking about fermentation. If you have a dough of wheat flour, and into that dough falls sourdough starter, wheat dough sourdough starter. So if the sourdough starter, if the starter is truma, is Isser, well there you actually can taste it in the mix because you can see if it fermented and if it's rising. So when it comes to min b'mino, the scenario where you could potentially taste the Isser and identify the Isser even though it's all wheat is when we're talking about starter of truma that falls into a dough of chulin. And is it rising, betzim? Is it fermenting? So or shel chitin. So when it comes to min b'mino, if you have starter of chitin, of truma, shenafal leisas chitin, and it falls into a dough, a wheat flour dough, so it's min b'mino, v'yesh bo k'dei lechametz, and there's enough starter to ferment and to what's the word I'm thinking? To leaven, I guess. So which is be'etzem ta'am, you can taste be'etzem, you can feel the iser in the heter, even by min b'mino. Bein yesh bo kedei lahalos b'meah ve'echad, whether there are 100 parts chulin to 1 part truma. Bein ein bo kedei lahalos, or certainly if there's less than 100 parts chulin to 1 part truma starter. Right? Ein bo kedei lahalos b'meah ve'echad aser. So in a situation where you could taste the iser, i.e., the dough is fermenting from this truma starter, so if you could taste the iser, aser. No matter what, it's going to be aser. Fine. Ein bo lehalos b'meah ve'echad. Now, when there is less than 100 to 1, well, in that case, bein sheyesh bo kedei lechametz. Well, certainly if it is fermenting, it's going to be aser. But bein ein bo, and this is the key, bein ein bo kedei lechametz, when you don't have ta'am. When it comes to min b'mino, that means that the starter is not fermenting all of the dough. There is no ta'am. So in that case, if it's less than 100 parts to 1, aser. It is aser. So what are we saying? The point that we're making here from this Mishnah of min b'mino is the following: that when there's no fermentation happening, i.e., there's no ta'am, so when it comes to min b'mino and there's no ta'am, you need 100 parts to 1. When it's min b'mino and there's no ta'am, you need 100 parts to 1. Okay, now, sheesh, where are we at? Okay, we're at the following point. We had said that by min b'she'eno mino, first of all, the ratio is 101 to 1. We said, well, that's by min b'she'eno mino, 101 to 1. By min b'mino, we're saying for some reason the ratio is different, it's 100 to 1. Okay, what else have we said? We have said that by min b'she'eno mino, when there is no ta'am, we are lenient. We said that by min b'mino, when there is no ta'am, we're stringent. And finally, what we have also said is that by min b'she'eno mino, when there is no ta'am, we are lenient, which means what in practice? That instead of requiring 101 to 1, we require 100 to 1. And we said that by min b'mino, we are stringent, which means that when there is no ta'am, you nonetheless need 100 to 1. Friends, isn't that the same thing? Right? By min b'she'eno mino, we're saying that we're being lenient when there's no ta'am. So instead of requiring 101 to 1, we require 100 to 1. That's how we're being lenient. And when it comes to, that's the lenient case. When it comes to min b'mino, and there's no ta'am, we're stringent by requiring 100 to 1. In both cases, when there's no ta'am, we're requiring 100 to 1. That's the same thing. And yet we're saying that min b'she'eno mino is more stringent than min b'mino. So something is not adding up over here. We need the... I may have just made a mistake. We're saying that min b'she'eno mino is more lenient than min b'mino. Min b'mino is more stringent. So something is not adding up over here, because on the one hand, we need min b'mino to be more stringent than min b'she'eno mino. And what we've been describing right now is that they're both the same, which is that when there's no ta'am, you need 100 to 1. So ask the Gemara, I don't understand. Reisha v'seifa b'meah. How could it be that both the reisha of min b'mino and the seifa of min b'she'eno mino are both meah, we need min b'she'eno mino to be more lenient than min b'mino. So the Gemara says, lo, no. This is what you have to say. Reisha b'meah v'chad, v'seifa b'meah. And the seifa is talking about 100, meaning, essentially, we were confusingly explaining earlier that by min b'she'eno mino, it was 101 parts to 1, whereas by min b'mino, it was 100 parts to 1. However, no, they are both the reisha and the seifa, both by min b'mino and by min b'she'eno mino, we're talking about 101 parts to 1. Which therefore means that by min b'mino, when there's no flavor, we say it requires the full 101 parts to 1. But by min b'she'eno mino, we're lenient. That by min b'she'eno mino, if you can't taste the split peas, you can't taste the iser, we give you a slight discount, we're lenient. We don't require 101 parts to 1. 100 parts to 1 is enough. But now, for the Gemara, can that really be what's going on? That by min b'mino, we're talking about the starter being fermenting a dough where there's 101 parts chulin to 1 part truma starter? V'chiyesh bo kedei lechametz b'meah v'chad amai lo batil. When we're talking about 101 parts of chulin dough to 1 part truma starter, how could it be possible that you will be able to taste that fermentation, that starter would be able to ferment such a large dough? We're talking about if you have some truma starter in a chulin dough, if you can taste that starter in the dough, it's automatically considered truma, even if there's 101 parts to 1. But how could it be that you can have 101 parts of chulin to truma starter and still be able to taste it? Ishtik and Rav Dimi was quiet. He didn't have an answer to that challenge, Amarle, but Abaye offered an answer for him. Dilma shiny seor dichimutzo koshe. Maybe seor, maybe starter is unique and that it could ferment even a large dough that is 101 times larger than it. Because it's very acidic, I guess, probably. It's fermenting. Omerlei, meaning it's not just like a standard food. It's a more potent thing. So Omerlei, so Rav Dimi says, Taka ad karton milsa dam Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. You reminded me of that which Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina said. Lo kol ashiurin shavin. In fact, not all shiurs are the same. Not all measurements are the same. For example, sharet tzir, when it comes to brine, if you're making some kind of a fish brine and you take an earthenware vessel and you put lots of kosher fish in there and I think some kind of solution, and you have one non-kosher fish in the vessel with all of the kosher fish, and the question is that brine going to become not kosher? When it comes to this brine, shiuro karv l'masayin. The shear can even be close to 200. It's not that we learn in the Mishnah in Masechta Trumis, dog tame, tziro aser, that a dog tame, its brine is aser. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, revius b'sasayim. Rabbi Yehuda says at a ratio of a revius in 2 sa'ah. Meaning, right, we're talking about iser and heter. You have all of these kosher fish you have an earthenware vessel with lots of kosher fish, and one not kosher fish, and it's in a solution and it's creating a brine. And the question is the not kosher fish that's in the mixture, is the brine that comes out from it, it's fish brine, is it going to make all of the brine aser? And Rabbi Yehuda says, if it will be a ratio of 1 revius for 2 sa'ah, yes, the non-kosher fish brine will make all of the brine osir. Now, what is, right, because it'll be tasted, right, it'll be affecting the entire brine. Now, what is a revius in 2 sa'ah? Well, a revius is what? A revius of a log, a quarter of a log. So let's figure out, it's not hard to figure out, we know this already. Now figure out how many logs are in 2 sa'ah. Whatever the answer to that is, since there are 4 reviuses in a log, we'll just multiply that by 4. Well, there's 4 logs in a kav, 6 kavs in a sa'ah. So 4 times 6 is 24 logs in a sa'ah, 2 sa'ah, 48 logs. Okay, great. And we're talking about a revius. How many reviuses are there in 2 sa'ah? 48 times 4, which is 192. So we're saying if there's 1 revius of non-kosher fish brine in 192, so that's nearly 1 to 200, we're saying that all of the brine would be usr. The point being that Abai suggested that maybe the sourdough starter would be able to ferment a dough that is 101 times larger than more than the starter, because as we see, there are certain things that are more, certain things are more potent than others, as we see that this fish brine is so potent that even if it's 100 into 92, 1 into 192, it could already make all of the brine osir. Technical question. Of course, we know that Rabbi Yehuda's shita is generally min bimino lo batil. Here we have min bimino, non-kosher brine in kosher brine, and yet we're saying it could be batil at 192 to 1. Shainitzir dezeh ba'almu answers the Gemara that, well, this brine is not really, it also says it's only also midrabanan, because it's not, it's just like it's considered like a sweat, not like a real substance that would be also midaraisa. Anyway, so Rabbi Yehuda would say that it could be batil at 192 to 1. Okay, great. So what did we see there? Well, we had this story, not quite a story, but anecdote with Abai and Rav Dimi, where they were talking and learning about Shishim and meah. Abai says, is there really such a concept as meah? He tried to bring rayas from these Mishnayos and Orla that we got to be talking about Shishim, but we managed to be able to, at least, at the skin of our teeth, hold on and say that we could explain those Mishnayos as talking about meah. Okay, fine. Okay, that was the difficult part of the daf. From now until the end of the daf, I'm expecting smooth sailing. Ketzah Mashayrinon. The Mishnah had said, interestingly, now how do we evaluate the Gid Hanasheh with the rest of the leg? Hooray! However, we can't test it out ourselves to see if we can taste the Gid Hanasheh, because you're risking eating Gid Hanasheh, tasting Gid Hanasheh. So we say, well, as a stand-in, you could imagine, like, instead of the Gid Hanasheh and the meat of the leg, you can have meat in a mixture of turnips. And if you'd be able to taste the meat in the turnips, then you can assume that you'd be able to taste the Gid Hanasheh in the leg meat. So Amr Avuna says, Avuna kibasar, like meat, biroshe lefatos, at the turnip heads. Apparently the turnip heads are sweeter, says Rashi, than the rest of the turnip, and therefore it would be harder to taste the meat. And if you could taste the meat in the turnip heads, then that is what we're looking for. And that would mean that if you have the equivalent of the amount of meat that it would take to be able to taste when mixed together with turnip heads, so then if you have that equivalent of Gid Hanasheh to leg meat, it would be awesome. Fine. Maslizin Deloki Aitana, and our Mishnah is not like the following Tana, because our Mishnah is assuming that the fact that, we're talking about Gid Hanasheh, no sein tam, that implies that sinews, gidim, nerves, have flavor. Titani, we learned about Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, ein begidim beno sein tam. Says Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that nerves, however, and sinews don't provide and don't contribute or as our friend Reb Jonathan Shapiro was talking to me earlier, impart flavor. So this whole question of if you have Gid Hanasheh, if it's no sin tam, there is no sin tam by Gid Hanasheh. How does the comment of Reb Chanina? There was a certain fellow who came to Reb Chanina and he had a shaila about Gid Hanasheh that got mixed into food. Have a Yosef, Reb Yehuda bar Zvina, Abba, and Reb Yehuda bar Zvina was sitting there by the doorway to Reb Chanina. Kinofak, and when this fellow asked this question to Reb Chanina and he left, Omar Le, Reb Yehuda bar Zvina said to this fellow, my Omerlach, what was the psak? Omar Le, Shari Niale. And the fellow said, it's mutter. I had a question about Gid Hanasheh, he said it's mutter. Omar Le, Hadar Aile Lekaime. To which Reb Yehuda bar Zvina said, can't be. Cannot be that Reb Chanina would have said that this mixture that has Gid Hanasheh in it is mutter. So Omar Man Hai the Komitzarli. So the fellow went back to Reb Chanina and he said, I'm re-asking the question. And Reb Chanina says, what is the deal with that guy at the door? Zil Emele Leman de Yosef Abava, go tell that guy at the door who sent you back in here, Ein Begidim Beno Sein Tam, leave me alone. The reason why, leave me alone, leave you alone, because the reason why this mixture is mutter is because Gidim have no flavor, and therefore this mixture is mutter. There is no tam of the Gid Hanasheh. Interesting little anecdote right here, because the comment of Ami, when they would come before Reb Ami, Mishadelu l'kamid Reb Yitzchok bar Chalov d'mor b'leter mishum de B'shua ben Levi v'leilo svirle. Very interesting. Reb Ami, he felt yesh begidim b'no sein tam, and if you would ask him about mixtures of Gid Hanasheh in terms of flavor, he would say it's osur because yesh begidim b'no sein tam. However, Rabbi B'shua ben Levi says ein begidim b'no sein tam, and Rabbi B'shua ben Levi is a big deal, and therefore, while Rab Ami himself held yesh begidim b'no sein tam, and the mixture would be osur, if you came to him with a question about flavor by Gid Hanasheh, he would say, you know what? Better you should ask Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would say it's mutter, which is very, very interesting. Kila, what do we see going on over here? Basically, somebody was coming to him with a shaila, and he knew that if he's going to pass in the shaila, he's going to be machmir. So rather than passing the shaila himself, he says, you know what? Why don't you go to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? He'll be makel for you. Which is super interesting. Kila, meaning, obviously you don't want to go fishing around for kulas, but what's going on here is that basically Reb Ami says, look, I hold that it's also, but Rabbi Yeshua, the great Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, right? Tosfos pointed out recently that when do you have machlokas Rav and Shmuel versus Rabbi Yochanan, we pass like Rabbi Yochanan. When you have machlokas between Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan, we pass like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Okay, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is a big deal. So Reb Ami says, look, personally I hold that it's also, but the great Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi holds that it's mutter. I can't tell you that it's mutter because I don't hold that way. But it's completely valid to be somech on Rabbi Shua ben Levi who says it's mutter. So take your question and why don't you go and ask Rabbi Shua ben Levi and he'll be matter it for you. It's very, 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 very interesting. I mean, I feel like I've heard this in the past, like different poskim say, look, I say it's also, but you can go and ask somebody else, who's a great Talmud Chacham, and he views this differently than me, and that's completely legitimate. If that, at least based on this story, it seems it would be completely legitimate if that other Talmud Chacham was being mekil, in fact, really is a great Talmud Chacham that you can be somech on. Very, very, very interesting. The Ilchasa ein begidin b'no tam, and the halacha is ein begidin b'no tam, that sinews and nerves don't impart flavor. Friends, that was Daf Tzadi Test, Daf 99 of Masechta Chullin. There were two sections, one major section, one minor section, at least just in terms of how much of our focus was focused on them. The first section, we wrapped up the discussion of Shishim and meah, about Kol Yisur and Shabbat Torah. Are they b'Shishim, like we're familiar with, or b'meah? And Abaye tried to challenge the notion of meah from Mishnayos in Masechta Orla about min b'mino and min b'she'eno mino. They were pretty tricky and subtle Mishnayos, but ultimately the opinion of meah was able to kind of navigate the challenges that were challenged to it. We then got into the question about yesh begidin benosin tam or ein begidin benosin tam, because of course our Mishnah was talking about if the gid Hanasheh is cooked with other food, you have to ask, is it nosin tam or not? However, the Gemara pointed out that there is a contrasting shita that says ein begidin benosin tam. There is no flavor in sinews, and therefore the concept of ta'am of gid Hanasheh imparting flavor is that there's no such thing according to that shita. And the Gemara says the ilchisa ein begidin benosin tam. The Gemara says that this is the halacha. Now, obviously, you're not allowed to eat the gid Hanasheh. That's an isur midaraisa. But in terms of would there be the flavor of the gid Hanasheh in addition? No, there wouldn't. Friends, that was the Tzadi Tes of Masechta Chullin. Have a great day. Have a great Shabbos. I will catch you later. Peace out.